The Altos are the Sims' most dangerous and nefarious family. The deadly feud between the Altos and Landgraabs made Nick, Vita, and their daughter Holly some of the most famous faces in Sims history. So when The Sims 4 left them out entirely, fans were stunned, and even more thrown when Holly finally returned, but not at all in the way anyone expected. Today, we're breaking down the complete history of the Alto family in the order the games were released, culminating with a complete timeline. From the Altos-Sopranos connection, to their surprising origins on the handheld ports, and to the developer decisions that shaped Holly Alto in The Sims 4, we're uncovering everything there is to know about this infamous mob syndicate. So put down your metal pipe, grab some gabagool, and let's get started. Believe it or not, the Altos were not a Maxis invention. I made a video that no one watched covering the Sims 2 console and handheld ports, which were made by Kryptonite Games, a now defunct company that was responsible for handheld ports of famous movies in the early 2000s. Absolutely iconic games such as Busting Out, Herbs, Sims in the City, and The Sims 2 were given unique versions on the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS that many of us look back on fondly. So much so that some of those characters were eventually brought into The Sims 4. One of the recurring characters across these games was Giuseppi Mezzoalto. He was first seen in The Sims Busting Out as the Van Man, a burglar who, aside from occasionally robbing your home, served as a moving service and, ironically, the game's main antagonist. His name, occupation, and look are all admittedly now kind of offensive stereotypes of the Italian-American gangsters of New York and New Jersey. Busting Out came out in 2003, well into the peak popularity of The Sopranos. Both soprano and mezzo-alto play on vocal range classifications, so it's clear that Giuseppi was meant to be an homage to that show. In Busting Out, Giuseppi is ultimately jailed for his crimes, but the end cutscene of the game reveals he's escaped. We meet him again in the Herb Sims in the City, which is nothing like the console version of the game, RIP Black Eyed Peas. At first, it's revealed he's working for the antagonist, Daddy Big Bucks, but it's later revealed that he's a double agent, secretly working for Detective Dandy Man, his former captor. When The Sims 2 received the Game Boy Advance treatment, Giuseppi was found roaming Strangetown. He now works for Frankie Fusilli, the local mob boss, as his daughter Ara's bodyguard. He's fallen in love with Kaylee Wintercrest, Strangetown's nuclear scientist, who apparently everyone in town is infatuated with, and, yeah, I can see why. This particular title is often considered not to be canon, as its entire premise is that the Goths are watching episodes of TV shows starring characters like Giuseppi. So, a show within the game's universe. In the Nintendo DS version of The Sims 2, which again is a completely different game from both the GBA and PC versions, we meet Giuseppi one last time. He's staying as a guest in the hotel the player has inherited. He doesn't participate too heavily in the plot, but if you get to know him, he reveals that the Giuseppi and Herb Sims in the City was a robot and imposter, implying that the cleaned up, reformed Giuseppi was nothing but a lie. Before we move into The Sims 3 and how the Altos came to be, if you're enjoying the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment below telling me your favorite moment. And click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. When The Sims 3 released in 2009, its flagship world Sunset Valley was set up as a prequel to The Sims 1 and 2. Like Old Town in The Sims 1, Sunset Valley was founded by the Goths, leading players to conclude these worlds were one and the same. But The Sims 3 reveals it was the Landgraabs who drove the town's huge boom in success and population. More recently, the wealthy Altos have arrived, and their presence has sparked a bitter rivalry with the ancient Landgraabs, one that's forced the whole town to choose sides. Nick and Vita Alto come from the big city, though specifically where is unknown. Nick is an utterly ruthless businessman who, alongside his wife, has plotted the misfortune of almost everyone they've ever met. He starts the game already well into the business career, but he has the wish to join the criminal career, bluntly suggesting his desire to work in the shadows. And despite owning a pool, Nick is hydrophobic. Just a fun little tidbit. Vita, on the other hand, is a local politician with the ambition to become the town's mayor. She's also an evil sim, which suggests she might actually be the brains of the operation, or at the very least, the enabler of Nick's shady dealings. You see, according to their bio, they unofficially own most of the local shops, which runs in contrast to the Landgraabs who own all of the infrastructure and technological sectors. In fact, both Nick and Vita despise Nancy and Jeffrey Landgraab. The two families are literally next door neighbors and get into arguments anytime they're near one another. But the reason for their hatred isn't very clear. Some have suggested it's because the Landgraabs are old money and the Altos are new, but I think the answer is a little more direct. Both Nancy and Nick are in the business career, and both are vice presidents. If you look at the description of that title, it states that the competition to become the next CEO is stiff. This implies both Nancy and Nick work at the same company, vying for the same job. Furthermore, as I covered in my complete history of the Landgraabs video, Nancy is participating in a fair bit of shady dealings herself. Which leads us to conclude that the two families are warring both in the office and on the streets. Both the Altos and the Landgraabs are acquainted with the Goths, the third richest family in Sunset Valley. But Vita is interestingly friends with them, suggesting she's managed to get them on her side. And that's a curious bit of foreshadowing. It suggests that the reason Sunset Valley eventually diminishes and becomes Old Town, and the reason the Landgraabs are absent from The Sims 1, is because the Altos ultimately win the battle for control and drive the town to ruin. For all their parents' scheming, it's a genuine surprise that their teenage daughter Holly Alto is actually a good person. Holly isn't an enemy of the Landgraabs, and in fact has little relationship with her parents. She's an artist and close friends with Bebe Hart, herself the only sane member of a rather wild family, which gives the two something to bond over. This whole family dynamic is very clearly a more direct reference to The Sopranos. Nick is Tony Soprano, a mean, ambitious man devoted to family. Vita is Carmela, the enabling wife who often turns a blind eye. And Holly is Meadow, the good and just child trying to reconcile her relationship with her troubled parents. Poor AJ, always getting forgotten. The Sims 3's third expansion pack, Late Night, reveals that the city of Bridgeport was founded by Ebenezer Alto at the turn of the century. The game gives us no background on who Ebenezer was, but if we assume turn of the century means the early 1900s and that Sunset Valley is set around the 1950s as the game aesthetic suggests, then the timeline lines up for Ebenezer to be Nick's grandfather. And if Ebenezer really is Nick's grandfather, it stands to reason that Bridgeport, the city his family founded, is the uptown Nick and Vita left behind for Sunset Valley. 1 year later, the downloadable world of Hidden Springs was released. Hidden Springs is a mountain retreat for the famous and fabulously rich, where the very waters are said to rejuvenate and even stall aging. One of Hidden Springs' many luxurious residents is Bert Alto, Nick Alto's estranged brother. Bert was once a prominent accountant to the stars in Bridgeport, which again cements that Nick and his family came from there, but now lives in luxury. His bio reveals he never cared much for accounting and is finally living out his dream after acquiring his wealth by suspicious means. He's a thug in the criminal career, which implies his dream was to be a mob boss like his older brother. Bert is friends with the Vanderburgs, Hidden Springs' royal family, and acquainted with many others, implying he's a rather popular figure in town. His bio suggests he's hiding away from someone, and it even hints that his brother Nick might be the one looking for him, which all points to Bert coming upon his fortune by stealing from Nick, though there isn't much hard evidence to support that. 6 months after Hidden Springs, Lunar Lakes was also released as a downloadable world. Lunar Lakes is a world set hundreds of years in the future, after pilgrims in search of a new world crash-landed on this arid planet and built a colony. There are many ancient families present here, such as the Goths, the Landgraabs, and the Landgraabs, so it's no surprise we find descendants of the Altos as well. Trenton Alto, his wife Eleanor, and their child Jareth are prominent and wealthy figures in town. Eleanor is a beautiful and successful surgeon responsible for many of the medical advances on the planet. Trenton, on the other hand, is a lazy socialite, and his bio indicates he's ridden the coattails of his wife's success for too long and is now losing the favor of the upper class. All the Sims who dislike Trenton are, interestingly, friends or distant friends with Eleanor, which implies they all think Trenton isn't the right person for her. Which rings true as Eleanor's previous boyfriend, Peter Stewart, is a gifted and handsome athlete. That being said, Peter has now had 3 unsuccessful relationships and is on the 4th, so I think Eleanor dodged a bullet. Their son Jareth is an artist crushed under the weight of his parents' expectations. His father wants him to be a politician and his mother a doctor, but all he wants to do is play guitar. Interestingly, his crush Carly Benton is in the same boat, giving the two much to bond over. It's impossible to say how these Altos relate to the ones we've met before, as Lunar Lakes takes place many centuries after their deaths. The downloadable world of Lucky Palms introduces us to Lola Lancaster, a former showgirl who's been entertaining a steady string of gentlemen since the untimely and, according to the police, accidental death of her husband Rico. Her whole situation is largely irrelevant to the Altos, but her bio does reveal that she once had an affair with Nick Alto and his brother Bart. This is obviously a mistake, the developers meant Bert. But it does reveal that the Alto boys have clearly had some bad blood between them for a while, and perhaps Lola was at the center of it. A few months later, the downloadable tropical world of Sunlit Tides introduces us to Griffin Alto. Griffin moved to Sunlit Tides to find himself before settling into the family business, but ended up falling in love with and getting engaged to a local named Tanika Wahine. Her father and police officer Leo hates him, and Griffin's bio indicates he may have to resort to drastic measures to marry Tanika. So Griffin is gonna unalive Leo, right? Like, that's what this is suggesting, yeah? The reference to the family business does imply Griffin is a criminal, but he's in the business career also, so it might be purposely vague. Leo hating Griffin for his family's shady dealings is on point, but ironic since his sister Alana is a literal mob boss who runs the actual family business here on Sunlit Tides. If you watched my video on the complete history of the Pleasant family, you'll remember that Sunlit Tides takes place a few years before The Sims 2, which means there's likely a 30 to 40 year gap between Sunset Valley and Sunlit Tides. The fact that Griffin is good and aspires for a larger family does suggest he's a descendant of Holly Alto, but that's just a theory. The Sims 3's 10th expansion pack, Island Paradise, brought us our final Alto family in the Sims 3 era. Alfonso, Lupita, and Ashley continue the Alto tradition of backstabbing and a deep focus on wealth. Alfonso built his fortune in island resorts, but only by stealing from and lying to his business partners. Something that was obviously very successful, as even the street they live on, Alto Road, is named after the family. His wife Lupita couldn't care less how they got the money. She loves to show off her wealth, and the rumor is she only married Alfonso for it. Her lifetime wish to be a gold digger only reinforces that. This might explain why the two have such a messed up relationship. You see, Alfonso is currently having an affair with a woman named Florida Hernandez, and worst of all, she's pregnant with his child. And true to form, even the affair is a backstab. Florida used to be with a man named Theodore, a rival who lost his resort plans and his lover to Alfonso. So Alfonso didn't just cheat, he destroyed a competitor and walked away with both his business and his girlfriend. Lupita may or may not be aware of all of this, but with a gold digger's heart, she isn't quite ready to leave her comfortable life behind. Lupita's parents, Olin and Yelena Ojeda, live on the island as well, though they're strongly implied to be estranged from her. Ashley, meanwhile, is blissfully unaware of her parents' marital troubles. And as if this couldn't get any messier, Ashley isn't Lupita's daughter at all. A patch that went out shortly after release quietly removed Lupita as Ashley's mother, leaving Alfonso as her only listed parent. Whether that was intentional lore or just a bug, the woman who's actually Ashley's mother is never named. As for where this family sits in the timeline, it's really hard to say. There's no confirmed link to the other Altos, although Alfonso shares a striking resemblance to Nick, so the two branches are very likely related. There are also a few smaller references to the Alto family tucked into the Sims 3 objects that are worth mentioning. Alwyn Alto is referenced in the Simoleons in Love Fountain, a piece commissioned to celebrate his win at the first annual Simoleon Card and Chip tournament. Unfortunately for Alwyn, he'd go on to lose his fortune, his home, his wife, and both his girlfriends after a crushing defeat at the second tournament. Alwyn lived in Sunset Valley, but it's unclear whether he came before or after Nick, Vita, and Holly. Pierre Alto, meanwhile, is a designer credited in the description of several lamp objects, and aside from his name, we know virtually nothing about him. Before we jump into the Sims 4 era, I should mention that Holly Alto and her husband Don Alto do appear in the Nintendo DS version of The Sims 3. This game is so not canon for a myriad of reasons, but the fact that this Holly is evil, serves as mayor of the city, and looks nothing like the Holly we know should be enough to grasp that. Bert Alto also briefly appears in The Sims Freeplay, along with a mansion called Villa Alto, but aside from that, nothing else really of note. With the release of The Sims 4 in 2014, we saw very few references to characters from past games. That being said, they did add a small nod to the Altos hidden in the game. If you didn't pay your bills, your power, run by the Landgraab Power Company, would be shut off, and your water, run by the Alto Water Company, would go out as well. This subtly suggests that the two feuding families eventually grew to such prominence that they took over entire industries, and that they may even be working closely together, albeit begrudgingly. In The Sims 4 City Living, the industrial city of San Myshuno featured a high-rise known as the Alto Apartments, high-end, modern, and exclusive. And again, as if one can't exist without the other, San Myshuno also featured the Landgraab Apartments, which were even bigger and even grander. It wasn't until years later, with the Get Famous expansion pack, that we finally saw the return of the Altos in The Sims 4. Amidst the various roaming townie celebrities added in the pack, we were shockingly reintroduced to Holly Alto. She's now a young adult and a 3-star celebrity painter. Everything about her is rather accurate to The Sims 3, but fans had a fit because she looks nothing like Holly. In The Sims 3, Holly had light skin, green eyes, and light brown hair with blonde highlights. In The Sims 4, she's tan-skinned with black hair and brown eyes. This confused players and continued to push the narrative that The Sims 4 exists on an alternate timeline. But I don't think people have really thought this one through. I don't believe the changes to Holly were an accident. I think they were a deliberate choice to make her fit her family. Because in The Sims 3, Holly's look never really made sense. Both her parents have dark hair, yet Holly doesn't seem to share any of their genetics. It's such a noticeable mismatch that the Sims Wiki flags it outright, and some players have even argued Holly was adopted. Now, the technical explanation is that she inherited recessive traits from an earlier generation, and we know she's truly their daughter. But whatever the in-game reasoning, the result was a daughter who looked nothing like her parents. So when The Sims 4 gave us a Holly who clearly resembles Nick and Vita, I don't think that was the developers making a mistake. I think it was them cleaning her up. So in the end, despite not being a fan of her new look personally, I do understand why they did it. Unfortunately, we didn't hear one word about the Altos again for years, until out of nowhere, the Royalty and Legacy expansion pack introduced us to a brand new member of the family. Enzo Alto is the current head of the Alto dynasty. His father is Bert Alto, making Holly his cousin. The family tree reveals that Bert, Vita, and Nick have all passed away, and as I covered in my Royalty and Legacy video, the ages of the Caps and Monties place Undarian sometime after The Sims 2. This is a bit wonky in the timeline considering Nick and Bert were already middle-aged in The Sims 3, but let's just chalk that up to storytelling. Enzo is a Marquess, which shows the family really rose in prominence over the years, and despite not getting along with Virgilio, he's allied with the Cap dynasty. This was a curious decision, but if you recall, Bert Alto was close friends with the royals in Hidden Springs, so it's very likely that relationship is what led to their family being elevated to nobility. Of course, the Altos still hate the Landgraabs, who themselves are aligned with the Thebes, who are enemies of the Caps. Enzo is a bit of a playboy, and there are no real indications that he lives a life of crime. But make no mistake, the Alto rot is still there. The family's dynasty ideals are literally connoisseur, devious, and passionate, and the game describes their trademark as passionate, loving, and toxic. The crime may be gone, but the family is as scandalous as ever. With almost 20 years of Alto history under our belts, let's put together a complete timeline of the Alto family. Ebenezer Alto, likely through nefarious means, founded the town of Bridgeport. Decades later, brothers Nick and Bert Alto became well-known gangsters in the city. Nick led the Alto family, while Bert served as their accountant, as well as accountant to some of the city's more prominent socialites. Both brothers romantically entangled with the showgirl Lola Lancaster. Around this time, Nick met and married Vita. Eventually, the relationship between Nick and Bert soured, whether over Lola or perhaps because Bert was embezzling from their family, we can't say for sure. Either way, the result was Bert fleeing to hide out in Hidden Springs. Nick and Vita had a daughter, Holly. Bert, meanwhile, would go on to marry and have a son of his own, Enzo. Nick, Vita, and a young Holly moved to Sunset Valley to grow their fortune, where Nick ignited a feud with his co-worker Nancy Landgraab, a rift that would span generations. Bert, for his part, cozied up to the royal Vandenbergs and eventually became a lord himself. In time, the Altos tightened their grip on Sunset Valley, driving the Landgraabs out. And with the Altos' shady dealings unchecked and Landgraab influence gone, Sunset Valley slowly declined into the place we'd one day know as Old Town. Holly grew up and became a famous painter, leaving her family's sordid past behind her. Enzo took the opposite road, becoming head of the Alto family and womanizing and scheming his way to the top. He eventually settled in Ondarian, allying himself with the Cap dynasty. Nick, Vita, and Bert all eventually passed away. Further down the line, more Altos appear. Alfonso becomes a real estate magnate with a string of illegitimate children, while Griffin, vacationing in sunlit tides, falls in love with the local and marries her. And generations after that, an Alto descendant boards a spaceship in search of a new home, crash landing on a barren world that would become Lunar Lakes. One of those survivors' descendants, Trenton Alto, marries a famous doctor, rises to a life of luxury, and has a son named Jareth Alto. Across nearly 2 decades of games, 3 console generations, and a dozen worlds, the Altos are never quite the same family twice. But whether they're running Sunset Valley or scheming through a royal court, one thing never changes. An Alto is always an Alto. Passionate, ambitious, and just a little bit toxic. And that's the complete history of the Alto family. The Altos are a family that never once met a shady deal they didn't like. So, are you Team Alto or Team Landgraab? If you side with Nancy, I've got a complete history of the Landgraab family that pairs with this one perfectly, so go give it a watch. And remember, I'm currently building a fully lore-accurate save file that drops The Sims 4 right onto the main timeline as a direct prequel to The Sims 2. You can get it over on my Patreon. The link is down in the description below. To my current patrons, thank you so much for your support. These videos wouldn't be possible without you. Finally, if you want to hang out live and watch me play The Sims and other games, come catch me Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 PM Eastern over at twitch.tv/mynameisGonz. Let me know in the comments which townie or pack you want me to cover next, and remember, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next one.